I was fighting for my country in Afghanistan when I got an email that changed everything. Some greedy HOA had sold my land while I was deployed, thinking a soldier couldn't fight back. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Here's how the US Army helped me get revenge. You know what they say about karma? Sometimes it needs a little help from Uncle Sam and a whole lot of military paperwork. My name is Jake Martinez, and I'm about to tell you the most satisfying story of my entire military career. It's about how a power-hungry HOA thought they could mess with a deployed soldier and ended up losing everything they held dear. But let me start from the beginning because this story is too good to rush. 3 years ago, I bought a beautiful piece of land in what would become Willowbrook Estates subdivision in Colorado. I'm talking about 5 pristine acres with a mountain view that would make a grown man cry. I got it for a steal $180,000 for land that's probably worth twice that now. The seller was an old rancher who was retiring and liked that I was military. "Son," he said, shaking my hand, "I'd rather sell to someone who serves our country than some city slicker developer." I was a staff sergeant in the Army Corps of Engineers at the time, stationed at Fort Carson. My plan was simple: build my dream house when I got back from my next deployment. I had the blueprints ready, the permits in progress, and every dollar saved up from years of deployments where I barely spent a dime. The land was perfect: rolling hills, mature oak trees, and far enough from the main road that you couldn't hear traffic. I used to drive out there on weekends, sometimes just sitting in my truck and planning where the house would go, where I'd put the workshop, maybe even a small barn for the horses I wanted to buy someday. There was just one tiny problem that I didn't think much about at the time. A month after I bought the land, a development company called Summit Properties started building houses around my property. They were creating this fancy subdivision called Willowbrook Estates, complete with curved streets, underground utilities, and houses that all looked like they came from the same cookie cutter. The developer, a smooth-talking guy named Richard Pemberton, approached me about selling my land to them. "Mr. Martinez," he said, adjusting his expensive suit, "we'd love to incorporate your property into our development. We can offer you $350,000 for those 5 acres. It was nearly double what I paid, but I wasn't interested. This was going to be my forever home, my little piece of paradise after years of living in barracks and temporary housing. "Thanks, but no thanks," I told him. "This land isn't for sale." Pemberton didn't like that answer. His smile got a little tighter and he said, "Well, you should know that we're planning to establish a homeowners association for the subdivision. Since your property will be surrounded by our development, you'll technically be part of it." I laughed. "How can I be part of an HOA when I never signed anything agreeing to join?" "The legal technicalities can be complicated," he said with a shrug that I should have paid more attention to. "But don't worry about it. I'm sure we can work something out." Famous last words, right? 6 months later, I got orders for a deployment to Afghanistan. 15 months of supporting infrastructure projects in Kandahar province. It wasn't my first rodeo. I'd done 2 tours in Iraq already, but it was going to be my longest time away from home. Before I left, I made sure everything was taken care of. I set up automatic payments for my property taxes, arranged for a local guy named Tom to check on the land once a month, and even installed a couple of trail cameras to keep an eye on things. I had a friend at the base legal office review all my paperwork to make sure everything was bulletproof. "Jake," Captain Morrison told me, "your property rights are solid. As long as you keep paying your taxes and there's no eminent domain issues, that land is yours. Don't worry about it." So off I went to Afghanistan, spending my days building roads and bridges, and my nights video calling with family and dreaming about the house I was going to build when I got back. The first few months of deployment went smoothly. Tom sent me monthly reports that everything looked good on the property. The trail cameras showed the occasional deer or rabbit, but nothing concerning. I even got some photos of the construction progress on the surrounding houses. The subdivision was taking shape and I had to admit it looked pretty nice. Maybe having neighbors wouldn't be so bad after all. Then month 7 happened. I was in the middle of a project meeting when I got an email that made my blood run cold. It was from something called the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors. "Dear property owner, this notice serves as a formal warning regarding multiple violations of Willowbrook Estates HOA covenants, conditions and restrictions CC and RS. Your property at 1247 Meadowlark Lane has been found in violation of the following. 1. Failure to maintain landscaping to community standards. 2. Presence of unauthorized structures, trail cameras. 3. Failure to submit architectural plans for approval. 4. Delinquent HOA dues, $2,400 past due. You have 30 days to remedy these violations or face legal action. including the possibility of foreclosure proceedings. Sincerely, Miranda Blackwood, HOA President. I read that email 3 times before it sank in. HOA dues? I never agreed to join any HOA. And what unauthorized structures? Those trail cameras were on MY property. I immediately called Tom, my property caretaker. Tom, what the hell is going on? Did you get any notices about HOA violations? Tom sounded confused. Jake, I check your property every month like we agreed. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just empty land with some trees and grass. What's this about trail cameras being unauthorized? They're on your own property. And have you seen any HOA notices before this? Not a one. But I'll tell you what's weird. They put up a fancy sign at the subdivision entrance that says, Willowbrook Estates, A Planned Community. Your land isn't even part of their streets or anything. It's just sitting there like it always was. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with the base legal office, trying to figure out what was happening. Captain Morrison was just as confused as I was. Jake, you can't be forced into an HOA without your consent. There has to be some mistake. Let me make some calls. While I waited for answers, I did some research online. I found the Willowbrook Estates website, complete with a fancy map of the subdivision. And there, right in the middle of their development map, was my property, listed as Lot 47, with a notation that said Future Development, Architectural Plans Pending. They had literally drawn my property into their subdivision map without my permission. Captain Morrison called me back the next day with news that made my deployment stress levels skyrocket. Jake, I've got some bad news. It looks like there was some kind of legal maneuver pulled while you were deployed. The developer filed paperwork claiming your property was always intended to be part of the subdivision, and they've got documentation suggesting you agreed to join the HOA. That's impossible. I never signed anything. I know, and we're going to fight this, but it's complicated because you're overseas. They've been sending notices to your property address, and since no one was there to receive them. Tom checks the property monthly, but he's not legally authorized to accept service of legal documents on your behalf. Jake, they're claiming you owe $6,000 in HOA dues and fines now, and they've filed a lien against your property. A lien? On the property I owned free and clear. The property I bought with money I earned getting shot at in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was furious, but Captain Morrison wasn't done with the bad news. There's more. They've scheduled a foreclosure auction for next month. They're claiming the right to sell your property to recover the debt. Can they do that? Legally? It's questionable at best. But if no one shows up to fight it, and if they've got a judge who doesn't look too closely at the paperwork, Jake, you need to get a lawyer involved immediately. So I did. I hired a property rights attorney in Colorado Springs named Sarah Chin, and she was just as outraged as I was when she reviewed the case. Mr. Martinez, she told me during our video call, this is the most blatant case of HOA overreach I've ever seen. They literally drew your property into their development map and created fictional HOA documents claiming you agreed to join. The problem is you're deployed, which makes fighting this in real time very difficult. What are my options? I'm filing an emergency injunction to stop the foreclosure, but I have to warn you, the judge they're appearing before is Judge Harold Whitmore, and let's say he's very business friendly. He tends to side with developers. Meaning? Meaning we might lose the injunction hearing, and they could actually sell your property while you're deployed and serving your country. The injustice of it hit me like a truck. I was literally in Afghanistan building infrastructure to help the Afghan people, while some greedy HOA was trying to steal my land back home. But Sarah wasn't done. There's something else you should know. I did some digging into this HOA board, and it's interesting. The president, Miranda Blackwood, is married to the developer Richard Pemberton. The vice president is Pemberton's business partner. And the treasurer is their real estate attorney. So it's not really an HOA, it's just the development company wearing a disguise? Essentially, yes. They created this HOA specifically to gain control over your property. Despite Sarah's best efforts, Judge Whitmore denied our emergency injunction. His reasoning? The plaintiff had adequate notice and opportunity to respond to the HOA's legitimate claims. Adequate notice. To a combat zone in Afghanistan. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Sarah planned to attend and bid on my behalf, but she warned me that they might have stacked the deck. I was sitting in my hooch in Afghanistan, calculating the time difference, when Sarah called me with the worst news of my life. Jake, I'm sorry. They sold your property. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. What do you mean they sold it? The auction was rigged. Only one bidder showed up, a company called Mountain Vista Holdings. They bought your 5 acres for $15,000. Just enough to cover the supposed HOA debt. $15,000? For property worth $300,000. It gets worse. I did some research on Mountain Vista Holdings. It's owned by Richard Pemberton's brother. They had stolen my land for $15,000. Property that I bought for $180,000, that was worth at least $350,000, sold to the developer's brother for the price of a used car. I sat in my hooch that night, staring at the concrete walls and wondering if this was what I was fighting for. Was this the American dream I was supposed to be protecting? Some rich developer could just steal a soldier's land while he was deployed? But then I remembered something Captain Morrison had told me months earlier. Jake, the military takes care of its own. It was time to find out if that was true. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes. She was a no-nonsense woman from Texas who had worked her way up through the ranks and didn't tolerate anyone messing with her soldiers. "Sir," I said after explaining the whole situation, "I know this is a personal matter, but I thought you should know that while I'm here serving my country, some HOA stole my property through what appears to be a fraudulent foreclosure." Colonel Hayes listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Martinez," she finally said, "do you have all the documentation?" "Yes, ma'am. My lawyer has copies of everything." "And you're telling me that these people created a fake HOA, forged documents claiming you agreed to join it, and then foreclosed on your property for made-up debt while you were deployed?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, ma'am." Colonel Hayes leaned back in her chair. "You know what this sounds like to me, Martinez?" "No, ma'am. It sounds like fraud. And when someone commits fraud against one of my deployed soldiers, that makes it my problem." She picked up her phone. "Get me the base legal officer immediately." Within an hour, I was sitting in a meeting with Colonel Hayes, Captain Morrison, and a JAG attorney named Major Rebecca Torres who specialized in service members' legal protections. "Sergeant Martinez," Major Torres said, "are you familiar with the Service Members Civil Relief Act?" "Somewhat, ma'am, but not the details." "The SCRA provides legal protections for active duty military members, including protection from default judgments and foreclosures while deployed. What happened to you appears to be a clear violation of federal law." Colonel Hayes smiled grimly. "Major Torres, what are our options?" "Well, ma'am, we could file a federal lawsuit under the SCRA. But there's another angle that might be more effective." "I'm listening." Sergeant Martinez's property was purchased with the intention of building a home after his military service. The land was fraudulently taken while he was deployed. This could be considered an attack on military readiness and morale. I wasn't following, but Colonel Hayes was nodding. "Go on, Major." "Fort Carson has an ongoing community relations program with local municipalities. We provide services, they provide cooperation. The city of Pine Ridge, where this subdivision is located, has been very interested in maintaining good relations with the base." "Meaning?" "Meaning they might be very interested to know that a fraudulent HOA in their city is stealing land from deployed soldiers." Colonel Hayes stood up. "Major Torres, I want you to prepare a full legal brief on this case. Captain Morrison, coordinate with the base public affairs office." "And Martinez?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't worry about this anymore. The United States Army is about to have a conversation with Pine Ridge, Colorado." What happened next was like watching a military operation unfold, except instead of targeting enemy positions, they were targeting HOA corruption. Major Torres filed a federal lawsuit under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, demanding the immediate return of my property and damages for the violation of my rights. But that was just the opening move. Colonel Hayes made a phone call to the mayor of Pine Ridge, explaining that one of her deployed soldiers had been the victim of what appeared to be an organized fraud scheme. The mayor, who depended on good relations with Fort Carson for the local economy, was very concerned about this misunderstanding. Within 48 hours, the Colorado Attorney General's office had opened an investigation into the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Turns out, when the military starts asking questions about fraud against deployed service members, people pay attention. But the real breakthrough came when Captain Morrison suggested bringing in the Army Corps of Engineers legal team to review the case. "Jake," he told me during one of our calls, "remember how you said the developer told you the legal technicalities could be complicated? Well, our legal team specializes in complicated." The core legal team discovered something that changed everything. When Pemberton's company had applied for development permits, they had submitted a plat map that clearly showed my property as excluded from development, private ownership. But the map they filed with the county to create the HOA showed my property as Lot 47, plan development. 2 different maps. 2 different stories. And both filed under oath with government agencies. Major Torres was practically giddy when she called me with the news. Jake, they didn't just commit fraud, they committed perjury. Multiple times. With multiple government agencies. What does that mean? It means the Attorney General is now treating this as organized criminal fraud. And it means we have grounds to demand forfeiture of all assets obtained through the fraud scheme. All assets. Jake, they used the fraudulent HOA to steal your land. But that same HOA has been collecting dues from all the other homeowners in the subdivision. If the HOA was created through fraud, then everything it owns could be subject to forfeiture. The scope of what was happening began to dawn on me. This wasn't just about getting my land back anymore. This was about taking down the entire fraudulent operation. While I was in Afghanistan watching this unfold through video calls and emails, things were happening fast back in Colorado. The Attorney General's investigation revealed that the Willowbrook Estates HOA was even more corrupt than we had imagined. They had been overcharging homeowners for services that were actually being performed by Pemberton's other companies. The landscaping company, the security company, even the snow removal service, all owned by Pemberton or his associates. But the real bombshell came when investigators discovered that Pemberton had used the same fraudulent HOA scheme in 3 other subdivisions across Colorado. He would buy land, develop it, create a fake HOA controlled by his company, and then use the HOA to extract maximum profits from homeowners while providing minimal services. Sarah Chin, my original lawyer, called me with an update that made my day. Jake, you're not going to believe this. The Attorney General has seized all assets of the Willowbrook Estates HOA pending investigation. That includes the community center, the playground equipment, the landscaping contract payments, and your land. They seized my land? Technically, they seized the fraudulently obtained deed. Your original deed is still valid, which means when this is all sorted out, you'll get your property back plus damages. But the best news was yet to come. There's more, Jake. Remember how they sold your land to Mountain Vista Holdings for $15,000? How could I forget? Well, Mountain Vista Holdings was part of the fraud scheme. So the Attorney General has seized their assets too, including several other properties they bought through similar foreclosure schemes. Please tell me you're going somewhere good with this. Jake, they're talking about criminal charges for organized fraud, racketeering, and theft from a service member. Richard Pemberton is looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. I had to sit down. After months of feeling helpless while deployed, watching my property get stolen by some greedy developer, the system was finally working. But Colonel Hayes wasn't done yet. Martinez, Colonel Hayes told me during our next meeting, the Attorney General's investigation is going to take months, maybe years. And while I'm confident you'll get justice eventually, I don't like the idea of you coming home from deployment to find your land tied up in legal proceedings. I appreciate everything you've done, ma'am, but I understand that the legal system takes time. Who said anything about the legal system? She smiled in a way that made me nervous. Tell me, Martinez, are you familiar with the Army's Innovative Readiness Training Program? Not really, ma'am. The IRT program allows military units to conduct training exercises that also provide community service. For example, engineers might build a school while training on construction techniques. I still wasn't following. Ma'am, I'm not sure what you're getting at. What I'm getting at, Martinez, is that Fort Carson has identified a training opportunity in Pine Ridge, Colorado. It seems there's a subdivision there that was built without proper infrastructure oversight. Roads that don't meet military standards for emergency vehicle access. Utility systems that haven't been properly inspected. That sort of thing. The light bulb went on. Ma'am, are you saying? I'm saying that the Army Corps of Engineers is going to conduct a comprehensive infrastructure assessment of Willowbrook Estates subdivision. For training purposes, of course. And if we find any code violations or safety issues, well, those would need to be corrected immediately. And if the subdivision can't afford the corrections? Then the local municipality would have to step in. Pine Ridge has been very cooperative, by the way. They're quite concerned about maintaining good relations with Fort Carson. I was starting to understand the beautiful, bureaucratic revenge that was taking shape. Ma'am, how extensive would this infrastructure assessment be? Oh, very thorough, Martinez. Very thorough. We'd need to examine every road, every utility connection, every drainage system. We might even need to test the structural integrity of some buildings. You know how important safety is to the military. And this would all happen when I return from deployment? Actually, Martinez, I think you'd be the perfect person to oversee this project. Consider it your homecoming assignment. I returned from Afghanistan on a cold Tuesday morning in March. Sarah Chin picked me up at the airport with news that the Attorney General's case was moving forward, but slowly. The good news is that your property deed has been restored, she told me as we drove toward Pine Ridge. The bad news is that Pemberton's lawyers are fighting everything, so it might be months before you can actually take possession. What about the criminal charges? Still pending. These things take time, Jake. But when we turned onto the road leading to Willowbrook Estates, I saw something that made me smile for the first time in months. There were Army Corps of Engineers vehicles everywhere. Survey teams, inspection crews, and a temporary command post set up right at the subdivision entrance. Colonel Hayes was there to meet me, along with Major Torres and about 20 soldiers from various engineering units. "Welcome home, Martinez," Colonel Hayes said, shaking my hand. "Ready to get to work?" "What exactly are we doing, ma'am?" "Infrastructure assessment and remediation training exercise. We're going to make sure this subdivision meets all federal safety standards for communities adjacent to military installations." Over the next 2 hours, Colonel Hayes explained the scope of what was about to happen. The Army had identified over 40 potential safety and code violations in the subdivision, ranging from inadequate road widths to improperly installed drainage systems. The beauty of this, Martinez, is that it's all perfectly legal and justified. We have legitimate training objectives, legitimate safety concerns, and the full cooperation of local authorities. "What about the HOA?" Major Torres laughed. "What HOA?" "The Attorney General dissolved the fraudulent entity. Right now, this subdivision has no legal governance structure, which means all decisions revert to the municipal authorities." "And Pine Ridge is cooperating?" "Pine Ridge is very motivated to cooperate," Colonel Hayes said. "Seems they're concerned about maintaining their contracts with Fort Carson. Millions of dollars in economic impact tends to focus attention." What happened over the next 6 weeks was the most satisfying professional experience of my military career. Every morning, I would drive to Willowbrook Estates and oversee a small army of engineers, inspectors and contractors as they systematically dismantled everything Richard Pemberton had built. It started with the roads. Our traffic engineers determined that the streets were too narrow for proper emergency vehicle access. Military standard required 24-foot wide roads. Willowbrook Estates had 20-foot roads. The entire street system had to be widened, which meant tearing up all the landscaping, sidewalks, and driveways. Then came the utilities. Our electrical engineers found that the underground power system didn't meet federal standards for electromagnetic interference with military communications. The entire electrical grid had to be rewired. The drainage system was even worse. Our environmental engineers determined that the storm water management system was inadequate and could potentially cause flooding that might affect Fort Carson operations. Every storm drain, retention pond, and culvert had to be rebuilt to military specifications. But the most beautiful part was watching the homeowners' reactions. These people had paid premium prices for houses in a luxury subdivision, and now they were watching military engineers tear up everything around them in the name of infrastructure improvements. Mrs. Henderson from Lot 23 approached me one morning as I was reviewing survey reports. "Sergeant Martinez, how long is this going to continue? We can't even get our cars out of our driveways." "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but these improvements are necessary for community safety. We should be finished in another month or two." "A month or two? And who's paying for all this?" "The infrastructure improvements are funded through the municipality, ma'am. Pine Ridge has been very cooperative." What I didn't mention was that Pine Ridge was billing all costs back to the dissolved HOA's assets, which meant the homeowners were ultimately responsible for the costs through special assessments. But the real satisfaction came when Richard Pemberton himself showed up. I was standing on what used to be my property line, watching a bulldozer remove the last of the fraudulent Lot 47 markers, when a black BMW pulled up and Richard Pemberton got out. He looked older than I remembered, more haggard. The expensive suit was still there, but it looked rumpled and his confidence was gone. "You must be Martinez," he said, walking up to me. "That's Sergeant Martinez, and you must be the guy who tried to steal my land while I was deployed." He held up his hands. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. The only misunderstanding was you thinking you could commit fraud against a soldier and get away with it. I want to make this right. I'll buy your land for fair market value. 400,000. Cash." I looked at him like he was insane. "You want to buy my land? The land you already stole and sold to your brother for 15 grand? That was a mistake. Legal complications. But we can fix this. Mr. Pemberton, let me explain something to you. This land belongs to me. It's always belonged to me. Your fraudulent foreclosure has been reversed, your fake HOA has been dissolved, and you're facing federal criminal charges. His face was getting red. You can't do this. This is harassment. I'll sue the Army. Actually, you can't sue the Army for conducting legitimate training exercises on public safety. But please call your lawyer. I'm sure they'd love to hear how you want to sue the military for doing their job. That's when Colonel Hayes walked up, apparently having overheard the conversation. Mr. Pemberton, I presume? She said in her command voice. Colonel, this is outrageous. Your people are destroying my subdivision. Your subdivision? I was under the impression that you were facing criminal charges for fraud related to this property. Those charges are baseless. This is all a misunderstanding. Mr. Pemberton, let me be very clear. Sergeant Martinez is one of my soldiers. While he was deployed, fighting for his country, you attempted to steal his property through fraudulent means. Now you can either leave this area immediately, or I can have the military police escort you out. Your choice. Pemberton looked at me, then at Colonel Hayes, then at the dozens of soldiers working around us. His shoulders sagged. This isn't over, he said weakly. You're right, I replied. It's not over. It's over when you're in federal prison and every dollar you stole has been returned to your victims. He got back in his BMW and drove away. I never saw him again. 3 months later, the Army's infrastructure improvement project was complete. Willowbrook Estates looked like a war zone that had been rebuilt to military specifications. Every road was wider, every utility line was upgraded, and every drainage system was rebuilt from scratch. The cost? $2.3 million. All billed to the defunct HOA's assets and assessed to the homeowners as special municipal charges. But here's the beautiful part. My 5 acres, sitting right in the middle of all this chaos, was completely untouched. While the Army was tearing up everything around it, my property remained exactly as I had left it, a peaceful island of trees and grass in the middle of a construction zone. The homeowners were furious, of course. They formed a new legitimate HOA and tried to sue everyone, the Army, Pine Ridge, the Attorney General, even me. But all their lawsuits got thrown out because everything we had done was completely legal. Richard Pemberton and his co-conspirators eventually pled guilty to federal fraud charges. Pemberton got 12 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $4.2 million in restitution to his victims. His brother got 8 years. Miranda Blackwood, the fake HOA president, got 5 years and lost her real estate license. But the most satisfying part came 6 months after I returned from deployment. I was sitting in my new house. Yes, I finally built it exactly where I had always planned. When Sarah Chin called with the final update. Jake, I wanted to let you know that the last of Pemberton's assets have been liquidated. After restitution payments, you're entitled to an additional settlement of $300,000 for the violation of your rights under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. $300,000? Plus your legal fees, plus damages for emotional distress, plus punitive damages for the fraudulent nature of the scheme. All told, you're looking at about $500,000. I looked out my window at the beautiful mountain view from my living room. The same view I had dreamed about during all those long nights in Afghanistan. Sarah, what happened to the other homeowners in the subdivision? Most of them sold their houses and moved away. The special assessments for the infrastructure improvements made it too expensive to stay. The few who remained ended up with much better roads and utilities, so they're actually happy about it now. And the subdivision itself? Well, that's interesting. Pine Ridge has redesignated the whole area as a mixed-use development zone. There's talk of turning part of it into a Veterans Memorial Park. I had to laugh. The subdivision that had tried to steal from a deployed soldier was being turned into a memorial for veterans. Today, 3 years after that whole nightmare began, I'm sitting on my back porch, watching the sunset over my 5 acres of perfect Colorado landscape. My house is everything I dreamed it would be during those long deployment nights. I've got my workshop, a small barn for the 2 horses I bought with part of my settlement money, and enough space to never have to worry about neighbors again. The best part? Property values in the area have actually increased since the Army's infrastructure improvements. My 5 acres are now worth close to $600,000, and I own them free and clear with no HOA, no covenants, and no restrictions except the ones imposed by basic municipal zoning. Sometimes I drive through what used to be Willowbrook Estates, just to remind myself that justice sometimes does prevail. Most of the houses are empty now, with for sale signs that have been there for months. The few remaining residents have actually become friends of mine. We have a shared understanding of what it's like to be victims of Richard Pemberton's schemes. But the real victory isn't the money or the house or even the satisfaction of seeing Pemberton in federal prison. The real victory is the knowledge that when someone tried to take advantage of a deployed soldier, the system actually worked. The Army took care of its own, the legal system eventually delivered justice, and the bad guys got exactly what they deserved. And every morning when I wake up in my dream house on my dream property, I remember that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. The moral of the story? Don't mess with deployed soldiers. We might be overseas, but we've got friends at home who know how to fight battles with regulations, legal briefs, and construction equipment. And when the United States Army decides to help one of their own, well, let's just say it's better to be on our side than against us. So here's to Colonel Hayes, Major Torres, Sarah Chin, and every other person who proved that sometimes the system works exactly as it should. And here's to Richard Pemberton, currently residing in Federal Correctional Institution Englewood, learning that crime doesn't pay, especially when you're dumb enough to commit it against someone who swore an oath to defend the Constitution. Justice served, with a side of perfectly legal military bureaucracy.